Welcome to Breaking Sales, a podcast dedicated to helping you have tough, meaningful, and rewarding conversations with your prospects and clients. In meaningful, what we mean is these are the conversations you truly feel like you are the prospect or client's conversational peer. There's no anxiousness or uncertainty holding you back. You feel a sense of calm and confidence in asking the tough questions. You're not thrown off by the bad news, and you expect the prospect to think about and invest into the conversation as much as you do. On Breaking Sales, we use the filter of psychology and innate human behavior to deconstruct the many misleading sales approaches that actually work against your efforts to build trust and close the business. Let's get started. There's an invisible force that awaits you every prospect conversation you have. It's far more devastating than your competition and the prospect's biases or loyalties. It grabs you like a vice, and it's so hard to escape. Looking back on my own career, it hampered me for years. Any win that I did have was often laden with this silent killer. What is it? It's the anxiety that you cause yourself to feel when you observe or hear something that you don't like, or you've labeled something bad. It takes you right out of the game. This is not an episode on anxiety disorder or anything clinical. It's a conversation about the self-inflicted harm we do to ourselves in moments of pressure. I'm referring to the type of anxiety that causes you to feel hesitant, uncertain, nervous, and frustrated in your conversations, and then the domino effect that it has on your results. Listen in as I share real-life stories on how some of our clients have learned to overcome this performance inhibitor in some of the toughest prospect conversations and situations. You have to remember, when any form of anxiety kicks in, you lose access to your highest level of skills, your listening, memory, verbal understanding, asking questions, always when you seem to need them the most. Let's dive in. Kristie, I'm going to kick off today with a story, all right? Today we are going to talk about anxiety, but it's not, I want to be careful with our listeners and our audience. It's not an anxiety disorder. I want to be clear. We're not clinical. We're not going to get into that kind of depth, but we are going to talk about why anxiety is so detrimental, how quickly it can set in, and how can you avoid it, or how can you manage it or minimize it if it does. And we're going to talk about how it does impact conversations. So I'm going to give the story. So a client of ours gets a nice meeting with a CFO, sits down with the CFO, has a good meeting, 45 minutes. At the end of the meeting, the CFO says to our client, "Hey, I'd like you to meet with our COO and our controller." At that moment, our client's feeling a little bit of anxiousness because he realizes he's being handed down in some shape, form, or fashion. Right? Didn't expect it. Uncertainty, right? Can't control it. It just happened. But what our client did then was very smart. He knew that there was a relationship in place, but he didn't know the details of any biases or loyalties that could be existing. So he turns to the CFO and he says, "Okay, you guys have had a relationship with your current provider for a while, right?" CFO goes, "Yeah, 10 years. Our client says, "Okay, do you know if the controller established that relationship 10 years ago, or if the COO did, or is it inherited?" CFO pauses and goes, "Hey, that's a really good question. I haven't thought about that. I believe the COO inherited the relationship, but the controller was the one who started the relationship." Our client turns to the CFO and goes, "Okay, can I ask you a very fair question here? One that plays out in real time all the time." CFO says, "Yeah, sure, go ahead. Do you think there could be some biases or some loyalties that might exist there because of the length of the relationship? And do you think that those loyalties or biases could impact the objectivity in the way they handle the conversation with me?
Great question.
CFO literally sits back, I guess, in his chair and is like, you know what? I have never thought about that before. Doesn't really answer the question, but then our client comes back in and says, let me ask you a little bit of a different way. How do you think they're going to react or respond when I reach out to them or you reach out to them and say, meet with me? Are they going to embrace it? Is it going to be more of a due diligence, extra work for them? Can we level set there? What's going to happen, you think? I share that story because that is a really good example where, unbeknownst to our client, he did feel that anxiety kick in when he realized, oh my, I thought this was going really well, and now I'm being handed down to somebody else. And these people that I am being handed down to, no fault of their own, may have a lot of loyalties and biases toward who they already do business with.
Yeah, they may not receive this too well.
Right. So for our listeners, we are today going to talk about this very real barrier, this very real obstacle, which is our anxiousness. It's our anxiety that we feel when it's time to perform, right? And anxiety, right, is when we are facing a situation or an environment or a circumstance that's uncertain and we don't know how it's going to play out. And then we start thinking about how are we going to control it so that it plays out the way we want it to, which is very difficult, if not impossible, for us to do. And so what happens is when we fast forward in our brains to something we want to play out a certain way, and we don't have any control if it really does or not, that creates anxiety within us. And when we feel anxiety, there's three impact areas. There's the behavioral, which is we tend to repeat ourselves. There is the cognitive, which is we actually do lose cognitive function with our memory, our verbal connectivity, and how we discern, right, a conversation. And there's even some physical, and many of our listeners would even know it, which is a little bit of an increased heart rate and maybe even sweaty palms.
Or sweaty other parts.
Thank you for the add on that one. This component or this feeling, this emotion of anxiety is very, very real.
I think it's very real, and it's also very frequent. So you gave one scenario, and I think it's an excellent one, where one can feel anxiousness or uncertainty and have all those things play out that you just listed of the cognitive function, the behavior, the physical manifestations. You know, I had one this week too with a client, different scenario though. And it was, she's had really good conversations. This is a really big opportunity. Great client that would be great to add to her book of business. And she realized that they can't necessarily do any better than what they have from a pricing standpoint, but they absolutely found some holes in what the due diligence of their current partner has done in the past. And so there's a potential of improving the quality of the work and the relationship. And she reached out to me saying, how do I communicate in a way that's going to prove that we can do better? How do I share this with a CFO that, yeah, they have the right pricing, but do they have the right relationship? And she was feeling this anxiousness, this uncertainty, and to her credit, knew I gotta reach out to Kristie because I'm not sure I'm gonna communicate in the way that I should. And she had to rethink, where is that coming from and how can I better communicate? Because it's the way that she was gonna go was not the way that she ended up communicating after she thought more about how her anxiousness was getting in the way. It's every conversation, so many different scenarios that have us feeling that way.
Yeah, when we're anxious, and I hear a lot, Kristie, I know you do too, in the film study that we do with our clients, right? People repeat themselves. There is the filler words. There is this need to quickly break silence. Those are all prime examples of when someone's feeling anxious.
Long-winded answers, not concise.
Yes. So for our listeners, I will share one of the better definitions of anxiety that I have heard is it's a common human emotion characterized by the feelings of worry, nervousness, or fear, often in a response to some kind of perceived threat or uncertainty. And I really like that definition. I think the threat part for sales is very clear, which is sales professionals work so hard, as you and I know, Kristie, to get that appointment. And then when they get the appointment, there's that innate human instinct to be attached, to be connected, or desire some positive outcome that you benefit from. And then when we start to realize that there are things that could get in the way of experiencing that positive outcome that we want, it immediately, it's viewed as a threat. And once we view it as a threat, that anxiousness, as I described, whether it's a behavioral, a physical, or a cognitive reaction kicks in, or maybe even all three. I mean, let's think about it for our listeners, right? When you work so hard for an appointment and you finally sit down and you're talking to that decision maker, all right, that perceived threat could be that they come into the meeting in a bad mood, right? They're standoffish. They give surface level answers. They seem disinterested. Or maybe they tell you things like, hey, we really like our current partner, right? Or we don't have a budget for this. Or we just made a change X 6 months ago. And there's more, right? But those instances, those moments in time, if we are attached, if we are looking for an outcome that we want, we will look at those things as threats, which will immediately trigger the anxiousness. And when we have that anxiousness kick in, we're not a good version of ourselves.
Absolutely not.
I can think of another example where this one sales professional found out that they had a 5-year relationship in place, the prospect did. And the meetings had been going well with the prospect, and they were at the end, we'll call it, of the decision-making process or cycle. But then the prospect looks at our client and says, if you guys can save us over 15%, we'll be able to pull this off. We'll do business with you. We'll give you guys the business. In that moment, the sales professional I know felt a lot of anxiousness because they had already invested 4 meetings in this particular scenario. So there was a little bit of attachment occurring. They felt like they were at the 1-yard line. And all of a sudden, maybe at the half-yard line, the prospect says, you got to save us 15% though. Again, this particular professional was able to calm, themselves. And in that moment, they were able to instead of getting annoyed, or agitated, they were able to invest in more questions. So they turned to the prospect and they were able to ask a question of, when you made this decision 5 years ago, what were the premises again that you made this decision for a change? Can you walk me through those? The prospect walked our client through it, and then our client asks, did you accomplish those changes? And the prospect was like, no, we got some of them done, but not all of them. That's why we engaged you guys, because we realized we weren't getting what we set out to get. Then our client asked the prospect, so when you did make the change, Was there savings involved? And the prospect was like, yeah, absolutely. We needed to save money. And so we told our current provider we had to save that money. Long and the short, the sales professional, our client, then turns to prospect and says, okay, do you think that the focus on the savings became so great 5 years ago that you missed the cues of, was your current partner truly capable of delivering the services that they promised? And there was like, I guess, dead silence. And if you think about that question, Kristie, right, that's a pretty intense, powerful question, isn't it?
Yep. It's a bold question.
But it was one that had benevolence behind it too, because then the sales professional then turns to the prospect and says, do you think you're at risk of doing the same thing here if you focus just on the price? So again, another example of the importance of learning how to calm ourselves down and not let that anxiousness spiral on us, all because we perceive something as a threat when it actually may not be.
It's one of the largest barriers to our high intent, as you mentioned, and our curiosity. So depending on where we are in the conversations and what we're trying to learn or understand, or what we're trying to answer to or ask a prospect, whether it be the lean-in challenge points, whether it be the bold questions that are coming from a good place of high intent, whether it be our general learning that we have to start out with to really try to determine whether or not someone is in a place that we can help them, and if we can help them in the right ways and meaningful ways. That takes a lot of curiosity, a lot of in the moment awareness, a lot of willingness to lean in, and it's the barrier to all of it.
Yeah, the two words I liked was the curiosity and lean in. Well, maybe 3 words, right?
Glad you can count, Dan.
Yeah. So I think the curiosity part is huge, and leaning in. In both of the examples that I gave, it was the lean in part. The sales professional was willing and able to keep themselves calm in the moment, which enabled them to lean in on what was transpiring in front of them.
To really help a thought process.
Right. I mean, and for our listeners, let's think about some of the things that are causing anxiety out there, maybe on a daily basis for you, that are truly out of your control. Like, number one, you have no control of an outcome when you are in a sales conversation, client prospect conversation. Your ego may think you are not. All right. And so the second you try to ask questions that leads the conversation to where you want it to go, or you start listening for only what you want to hear because you want to drive the conversation again to where only you want to go, or you jump in early and for no apparent reason and start promising the prospect they have a chance to meet your team, or they can do a demo, and you make that promise very early in the conversation because you're hoping it's going to stimulate that prospect to start moving in the direction you want to go. Anytime you start doing those things, you've become attached to the outcome, and you are trying to control something that you can't, and you are going to create for yourself a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, the more we try to control it, the more the anxiety builds.
Exactly. And the other thing, Kristie, you and I talk about a lot is it's the same as being caught in that never-ending, endless cycle of trying to validate yourself, right? Or impression management.
Yeah.
You're seeking something outside yourself that you cannot control. And so you start putting effort into it, knowing or maybe not recognizing that you can't control it. and there's no guarantee you're going to get a payoff, that whole process will start to cause you anxiety.
When it's the wrong kind of effort
Right.
when that's happening. It's the wrong effort. It's the effort of how do I need to communicate that's going to impress this person, or how do I need to show up to prove that there's value here. And so we're putting effort in, but it's the wrong effort that's going to actually push the best outcomes away, further away. And it's also pushing us away from our authentic selves, that and our performance skills, it pushes away from those things as well. So we're not at our best. We're not at our best.
You mentioned performance skills. So what are some of those skills that you think about that when we become anxious, we're no longer able to perform at a high level, or maybe not even at all during a conversation?
Well, I think it's every attribute and skill that we talk about in every episode of our podcasts. It's everything that we put into our deliberate focus and practice on being our best self with what we're thinking, taking control of our thoughts for where we need to be to peak perform. The mindset, all of it. It's the questions we're asking and leaning into some of the discomfort of, I don't know the answer here, but the reality is they need to know the answer. So I've got to ask this question. and those curiosity questions to really go deep and really understand where they are, what they're thinking, how they operate, how they make decisions, and whether or not there's objectivity in their thinking, to identify where I may need to ask more questions or maybe call a few things out. Calling out the kind, hard truths. That's a skill that is impeded if we're feeling anxious or uncertain or fearful or threatened. How we share our suggestions, our ideas, our IP. That's a skill that gets clouded
Yeah,
if we're anxious.
what's interesting about what you're sharing is, right, it's you set out to try to control something you can't control. You're driven, right? You want to do well. And so all of a sudden now you find yourself trying to control things you can't control, which is outcomes. And because of that, you start to feel anxious. Ironically, it's your ability to actually control something you can control, which is how you perceive and filter some of these situations, quote unquote, threats. They're not really threats, they're opportunities. So again, trying to control something you can't control is going to cause anxiety. But what the cool thing is you actually can control that anxiety part in a way by reframing how you perceive, how you filter the situation, circumstance, or interaction that you're in. And so for our listeners, bet heavy on that mindset that allows you, all right, to take in information and observations and don't label them good or bad, positive or negative. It's not for you to label. Stay away from labeling things as a threat. That's first and foremost. And the only way you can do that is by strengthening that mindset, strengthening how you're going to filter what you're observing around you.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to make sure I mention for our listeners is, so our previous two podcasts were about closing, right? We covered a lot. In those podcasts, we had some skills that we mentioned that are top performing skills no matter what industry that you're in. Things like asking really good questions to help that prospect critically think and debate, right? That's a skill, right? Asking great questions so that prospect, right, allows themselves to feel some of that positive tension as they really do start debating change or no change, right? Or becoming more objective about the situation that they're in, right? Or even the prospect thinking through something like risk versus gain while we're in the room with them about what does change look like for them? What are the risks and what are the gains? As they sit in front of us, we are able to have that discussion with them. Those types of skills can only happen if we are avoiding the perceptions of threats and uncertainties. Because once we look at information as a threat or an uncertainty, that's when the anxiousness kicks in, and that's what causes us to pull back. We'll never be able to perform those high-performing skills. So it's a true cause and effect. And if I share it with the listeners, it's, right, the results are you don't ask questions and you don't learn enough, and you're not really engaging the prospect with the critical thinking that they need to truly consider a change to your services. That's the result. The cause of it is you allowed yourself to filter something or a series of things within the conversation as a threat to you, as a threat to your outcome that you want, as a threat to validating yourself, as a threat to being liked or finding pain or whatever it might be. You perceived things in the conversation as a threat. And you did that because you filtered everything through scarcity and attachment. So it's a complete domino effect. So the best way to stop it and the easiest way to stop it is to be very aware of, again, how you're filtering what the prospect's sharing and what they're doing and any other observations you have in the meeting.
And experiment and work on a practice to find the calm.
I love the calm, and we talk about that a lot in our work. So for our listeners, how would you define that maybe in trying to help them find their calm?
In terms of helping the listeners discover their calm and find their calm, I think it starts with, you got to identify when it needs to happen. So those sweaty palms that you mentioned, the physical symptoms, we all feel it differently. We all feel our anxiety differently. And anxiety is a normal, to your point, reaction to what we're sensing around us. And so what are your specific symptoms felt in those anxiety moments? I think first it's just pay attention. Start recognizing it. Start coming out of meetings and saying, where did I feel a little anxiety and what made me feel that way? And if I had the moment back, how would I know that it was happening? Is it my heart? Is it my breathing? Is it the sweating? Do my thoughts race? Do I black out? Do I feel it in the pit of my stomach? Do I feel an elephant on my chest? What is it that I can potentially feel? Because once you know that, then the experimentation and the practice can be more effective.
You make a really good point there. I'll remind the listeners on that as well. Your step one is simply be aware, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to Kristie's point, sweaty palms, right? To Kristie's point, it might be, and we talked about this earlier, right? You're repeating yourself, or you're talking fast, or you have this disdain or fear of silence in the conversation. You're having difficulties really listening to what the prospect's saying. You're watching their mouth move, but you're not comprehending the words because your brain, your mind, all right, is spinning, all right, on what's this going to do to the sale? What's this going to do to them liking me? Or what's the impact is this going to be on them wanting to do business with me, right? You're not in the moment. All of those things tell you that you've just filtered something or a series of things as a threat. And at that moment, you have to be able to remind yourself, nope, there's no good or bad. It's not a threat. It's just current information, or it's a current perspective. it doesn't mean anything yet. You gotta have that skill, because once you can do that, you actually will feel that calm set back in.
And clear thinking.
Exactly. You'll get right back to your strength, which is your clear thinking, how you are comprehending the conversation. All right. Thanks for listening.
Always a pleasure, Dan.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want you to think about this. What physical or behavioral signals tell you that anxiety is creeping into your conversations? Maybe it's sweaty palms, repeating yourself, or that urge to fill every moment of silence. How many times do you say yes or yeah or something else every time the prospect speaks? How do you handle silence? Do you get nervous? Do you feel like you have to say something? The first step to managing anxiety is recognizing when it's happening. Start paying attention to your own patterns. Come out of the meetings and ask yourself, where did I feel anxious and what triggered it? What did I observe or what did I hear? Remember, anxiety kicks in when we try to control things we can't control, like outcomes. No matter how much energy you put toward fretting about an outcome, it has no bearing on what's actually going to happen. Let it go. Trust this new thought by stop labeling things as threats and start seeing them as just information. You're human, so this isn't about being perfect or mastering this. It's about strengthening some of your awareness one moment and conversation at a time, so you can make the mental and self-talk adjustments. That leads to better results for you and your prospects.